Are you looking for a podcast that contains bizarre theories, strange facts, and some out of this world opinions? Then this podcast is for you. Listener discretion is advised, especially if you trust the government.
Conspiracy.
Welcome back, conspiracy lovers, to another episode of Conspiracy, the show where no story is too strange, no theory too far-fetched, and no one is safe from our deep dives into the unknown. I'm Ash, your host, your guide into the world of conspiracies, and occasional devil's advocate. If you're new around here, welcome to the rabbit hole. Just a reminder, we drop new episodes every Wednesday. And before we get started today, if you are listening to this podcast, could I ask a huge favor? Could you hit that subscribe button for me and please leave me a quick positive review? It really helps, guys. We're getting seen in the podcast world. I would really appreciate it, and I want to keep creating this podcast with you and build this conspiracy community. So if you could do that for me, I will love you forever, please. Okay, so today we're talking about one of the juiciest tales in Russian history, the Romanovs and their dodgy pet wizard, Rasputin. Honestly, this story's got everything. Political drama, check. Monarchy takedown, check. A mystical weirdo who just wouldn't die? Triple check. Seriously, Rasputin was like history's first cockroach. No amount of poison or bullets could get rid of him. We're diving into the fall of the Romanov dynasty, a royal family so out of touch they were basically Russia's version of the Kardashians, except with fewer selfies and a lot more tragic endings. We'll be covering the rise of Rasputin, the so-called mad monk, who somehow went from peasant weirdo to the Tsarina's favourite human paracetamol. We'll also explore Nicholas II, Russia's most reluctant Tsar, who ruled like a man who just wanted a quiet life and somehow ended up on the wrong side of a revolution. And of course, we'll get into all the conspiracies because this is conspiracy after all. Was Rasputin really magic, or just a great hypnotist with a personal hygiene of a medieval sock? Did he control the Romanovs with mind tricks, or was he just in the right place at the wrong time? And most importantly, did his alleged big old whopper actually end up in a jar somewhere? Yup, apparently he got that dog. By the end of the episode, you'll have learned how a stinky peasant from Siberia convinced the Russian royal family he was their guardian angel. Spoiler, hypnosis was involved, but not the Las Vegas variety, let's say. Why trust in a man who openly says he sins to get closer to God is never a good idea. Spirituality, or just the best excuse for bad behavior ever. And finally, that if someone won't die after being poisoned, shot, beaten, and drowned, maybe, just maybe, they're not a man at all, but the world's first supervillain. Or just really lucky. Either way, by the end of this, you'll know more about Russian history than you've ever learned in school. Plus, you'll have some brilliant conversation starters for those awkward family dinners. So grab yourself a cuppa, or maybe a shot of vodka, because we're heading to Russia. And let me tell you, things are about to get properly bonkers. Absolutely bonkers. Now, there's a lot to cover here, so this is likely going to be part 1 of 2 on the Romanovs and Rasputin. Alright then, let's get into it. Right, so let's set the scene. It's early 20th century Russia, and things are looking, well, pretty bleak, to be honest. You've got the Romanov family ruling over a country that's absolutely gigantic. We're talking 1/6 of the planet's landmass. And they're ruling it like they're God's gift, quite literally, because they believe they were chosen by God to be in charge, which, to me, feels like the ultimate "Dad said it's my turn on the Xbox" excuse. But the Russian people, not buying it. They're living in poverty, eating mostly potatoes. Meanwhile, the Romanovs are chilling in palaces so fancy that even Beyonce would be like, bit much, innit? if she had a British accent. imagine Beyonce with a British accent. Yeah, you're right, mate. Texas Hold'em, mate. No Hold'em, Texas Hold'em. Remember those walls I built? Maybe they're tumbling down. If you like it, yeah, should have put a ring on it, innit? Okay, I'm done. I'm done. So yeah, but if you like it, sure, put a ring on it, innit? I swear I've seriously heard that from someone before. Not gonna lie. Anyway, the Romanovs, they were basically Russia's versions of the Kardashians, right? Filthy rich, out of touch, and constantly making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Except instead of launching a perfume line or a reality show, they kind of launched World War One and got themselves, well, we'll get into that. And who's in charge? Nicholas II. Now, Nicholas wasn't exactly king material, let's say. He was more of like a nervous substitute teacher, I'd say. He was nowhere near a fearless leader. Honestly, the man would have been happier tending a garden somewhere, tending to his crops. But instead, he's stuck ruling Russia and doing an absolute terrible job of it. Oh, and then there's his wife, Alexandra, who, to be fair, just wanted to keep her son alive, and that's where things get spicy. Enter Rasputin. Now, some of you might be thinking, Rasputin, I've heard that somewhere. And you might be thinking, I know that guy from the Boney M song. Rah, rah, Rasputin, leader of the Russian Queen. Yeah, first of all, solid song choice. Great fucking song. Honestly, great. But that song, the lyrics, it barely scratches the surface of Rasputin. The real Rasputin wasn't just the lover of the Russian queen, he was a mystical weirdo, a hypnotist, and quite possibly the original Florida man, except, in Siberia. So, who was Rasputin? Well, imagine if a homeless wizard and a dodgy faith healer had a baby. That's Rasputin. This bloke was a peasant, a mystic, a self proclaimed healer, and just on top of it, a hypnotist. I know. We are ticking all the boxes of creepy villain bingo card. Some say he was a holy healer. Others, however, say that he was just a creepy, unwashed lunatic. Kind of like the hippies who go to Thailand. And like they're like throwing a baton around and yeah, peace and love, dude. Like that gives me that kind of vibe. Creepy, unwashed lunatic. Um, but somehow he looked his way into Russia's royal family. And honestly, looking at some of the politicians today, I'd say that's a real possibility. He was also famously hard to kill, but we will get into that later on. And just to clear things up about the song, he was not the bloke from the disco song, right? Although, to be fair, if you believe half the rumours, that description isn't far off. Apparently, the man was a proper ladies' man, despite the fact he looked like he'd been dragged through a hedge backwards. Twice. Right, so how did this hairy hypnotist go from being a peasant in Siberia to having the Russian royal family wrapped around his finger? And more importantly, did he really bring about the downfall of the Romanovs? Or was he just a very stinky scapegoat? Alright, so let's dive into Rasputin's early life and a bit of background so you can kind of understand who the bloody hell this guy is. So, before Rasputin became Russia's most controversial house guest, he was just a humble peasant with a very complicated name to say, and I'm going to absolutely butcher it, but here we go. It's Grigori Yefimovich Rasputin. Now, if I got that wrong, let me know in the comments, but if I got it right, also let me know in the comments because I'd be pretty proud of that one. And yeah, I mean, try saying that 3 times fast in a row. I mean, come on. But let's not. From here on out, we're just going to call him Raspy because I can't be bothered to keep saying Rasputin. So, Raspy from here on out. Rasputin, Raspy. Okay? So, Raspy. He was born on January the 22nd, 1869 in Siberia, making him an Aquarius. Shout out, he's an Aquarius like all great leaders or cult leaders, let's say. Let's fucking go, Aquarius. So he was born in Siberia, and if you're thinking of a snowy, desolate place with nothing to do except drink vodka and wrestle bears, yeah, you pretty much nailed it. So not exactly the birthplace of someone of royalty, let's say. But it was the birthplace of this man who would somehow worm his way into the Russian royal family. Although, to be, when you are born in a place that cold and boring, like, what are you gonna do all day? Just lie around in the snow all day? Like, no, I mean, you've got nothing better to do, so you might as well plot your way to the top or cause absolute chaos in your wake, which Raspi did brilliantly, by the way. And we're gonna get into all of the fucking juicy details, don't you worry. But first, he was one of 7 children, but all of his siblings died young. He was actually the only one who made it to adulthood, and probably because death took one look at him and thought, yup, not dealing with that. I mean, he was a weird kid, right? He was a really, really weird kid. It's just red flags, trust me. Locals called him the debauched one, which is never a great nickname. I mean, I've been called some things in my time, but to be called debauched, I mean, come on. Can you imagine going to school and the teacher's like, "Oh, here comes little Timmy, the debauched one." No wonder he turned into a fucking weirdo. Uh, anyway, so he actually went to school for a bit, but stayed illiterate, which is a pretty impressive level of not giving a toss. He did, however, develop a reputation for being a little strange. People who made accounts of him when he was at school, or kind of, gave their review of him later in life, I guess, said that he could actually see things like visions and had some sort of mystical powers. Or he could have just been really good at making shit up. I mean, either way, people were intrigued, including myself. So at 18, Raspi tried to be good, went off to a monastery, which is the 19th century Russian equivalent of I'm taking a gap year to find myself. But instead of finding God, he found a dodgy religious sect called the Klishti. The Klishti. That's spelled Khlysty. The Klishti. That's so nice to say. The Klishti. Klishti. We don't really have any words like that in English, do we? Like Klishti. It's pretty nice. Anyway, so this religious sect called the Klishti were people who believed that the only way to get closer to God was to actually sin and then repent a lot. Basically, it was a do bad things on purpose, then say sorry sort of religion, and then one of our favorite kind of religions here on Conspiracy. It's very convenient. But yeah, it's basically just like the world's worst feedback loop, isn't it? And Raspi, being the opportunist he was, took his idea and ran with it, right? He even went as far as tweaking their beliefs to fit his own preferences. He decided that the best way to get close to God was through holy passionlessness, which apparently you achieve through sexual exhaustion. That's right. He told people the best way to become holy was to shag your way to salvation. And some people actually believed him. I mean, honestly, this man was a genius. I mean, a total creep, but absolute genius. Where do I sign up? Um, so he managed to convince people that his dodgy sex life was all part of his holy calling. And after getting kicked out of the monastery, yep, even they were like, mate, you've taken it too far. He goes back to his village and marries a woman named Praskovia Fyodorovna Dobrovina. The Russian names are so hard to say, but so nice. Praskovia Fyodorovna Dobrovina. So they had 4 kids together, which is pretty impressive considering he then immediately left them to wander around Russia, claiming he was a holy man. He's basically... Oh my god, I can't say that. I can't say that. Oh, there's a joke in there, but I'm not gonna go there. And anyway, and by holy man, we mean wandering mystic who lived off donations from poor peasants, and these people gave him money even though they were struggling to eat themselves. So that's how manipulative he really was. He could convince starving peasants to feed him before they fed their own kids. Honestly, incredible salesman. Or politician, actually, yeah. Incredible politician. Actually, scratch that. No, I think he did become a politician in his own weird way, but again, we'll get into that a bit later on. For now, just know that Raspi was wandering around Russia, building a reputation as a mystic, healer, and quite possibly the world's first con artist with a fan club. So how does a creepy peasant with dodgy religious ideas end up in the inner circle of the Russian royal family? Simple. Right place, right time, and the most hypnotic eyes in all of history. Seriously, people said his eyes were so intense, they were like staring into the abyss, which makes sense considering his soul was probably just as dark. Or maybe he was just ahead of his time and got like that smoky eye makeup on, like, like what do they call it? Oh fuck. I don't know what the word is, but like dreamy eyes or something like that. He's put a little bit of eyeliner on and is just staring into the abyss. But anyway, it worked, and Raspy was about to make the leap from weird mystic to royal confidant, and Russia would never be the same again. So Raspy arrives in St. Petersburg in 1903. Now, St. Petersburg wasn't just any city, it was the heart of Russians' high society. It was filled with wealthy nobles who were just bored out their minds, and when rich people get bored, they get weird hobbies. In this case, they were obsessed with mysticism and the occult. Yep, they were having seances, talking to ghosts, and basically acting like Victorian goths with too much money. And Raspy, with his creepy eyes and mysterious aura, was exactly the kind of weirdo they were looking for. It reminds me of like hipsters in Shoreditch who get really into tarot cards and crystal healing. But instead of, the usual overpriced candles, they were actually buying snake oil from Raspy. So, he strolls into St. Petersburg, walks into this religious academy, and somehow charms the head honcho, the chief inspector. I don't know what a chief inspector does at a religious academy, by the way. I don't know, checks hemlets, counts how many sins. No idea, but this bloke absolutely loved Raspy. Yeah, the guy was like, "You're weird. You smell like a damp cellar, but you seem mystical. Welcome to the crew. Like, get involved." And this is where Raspy's look really kicks in. You see, the Russian aristocracy was completely obsessed with mysticism. They were convinced that magic and the occult were the height of sophistication. So Rasputin was like a living, breathing Ouija board to them. But can you imagine that? This dirty peasant from Siberia walks in, does some mystical mumbo jumbo, and suddenly he's the talk of the town. And the best part, no one questions his dodgy background or his dodgy hygiene, which, by the way, was terrible. I keep calling him Stinky because his hygiene apparently was so terrible. He was known for not washing ever. Apparently, he thought bathing was a waste of time, which is probably the only thing he had in common with Henry VIII, to be honest. People said he smelled so bad that his scent lingered in a room long after he left. Imagine that's the legacy you leave behind. Like, imagine now what we're 2025, 120 years later, and you've got Ash calling you a stinky salesman. But maybe that was all part of it. Maybe his smell, his eyes, it was all of this accumulation of like this weird cult leadery kind of figure. And that's exactly kind of what he became, to be honest. He did become a cult leader. Like, he had people convinced left and right that he could heal the sick, predict the future, and talk to God. So that's we kind of see that coming through a lot of cults, a lot of famous cults that you can do a lot of research on. A lot of the leaders of these cults, like Charles Manson, Jim Jones, David Koresh, um, they all said that they were messengers of God and that they could predict something that would happen in the future. Um, the world coming to an end or the second coming, and that they were the closest thing to God, and that's why people follow them. That's why people join these cults, is because they believe if they don't, when the rapture comes, they will be left behind. But if they're with this person, this figure that is associated with God and the closest thing and could talk to God, then they will be saved and spared. So essentially, that's what he was. He was a cult leader, and I think a lot of these, your Mansons and your John Joneses, they probably read the book on Rasputin and just followed what he did step by step, just maybe not the smelly part. But that's exactly how he caught the attention of the Russian royal family, because while he was hypnotizing half of St. Petersburg, the Romanovs were actually dealing with a crisis of their own. So, Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra had a son, Alexei, who was sick, like really sick, and no one could figure out what was wrong with him. Doctors were absolutely useless, which, to be fair, isn't surprising. It's the early 1900s, and their best treatment for headaches was leeches, or cocaine. Yeah, seriously, they gave kids cocaine back then. Yeah, no wonder they were always happy. Anyway, so with no solutions from the medical community, the royal couple started looking for alternative methods, right? And that's where Raspi shimmies his way in. He hears about the sick kid, puts on his best mystic act, and somehow convinces the most powerful family in Russia that he's the only one who can save their son. And you'll never guess what? It worked. Yep. He shows up, does his prayer hypnosis magic, and the kid miraculously recovers. So was it actually healing? Who knows? But it could have also been the fact that Raspi just told the doctors to stop giving the poor kid aspirin, which was actually making his condition worse. But the royal family was convinced Rasputin was their miracle worker. So just like that, Raspi goes from creepy peasant to Tsarina's #1 confidant. He's hanging around the palace, whispering sweet nothings in her ear, influencing political decisions, and pissing off literally everyone else in Russia. I mean, come on. Imagine you're a Russian noble, born into wealth and power, and suddenly this smelly peasant is bossing you around because he's hypnotized the Tsarina. You'd be absolutely fuming. Like, get rid of this smelly person. Honestly, you'd be at the time as well, early 1900s. You got all these Russian nobles around. You would be plotting this guy's murder within a week. Like, absolutely, there's no doubt about it. And that's exactly what happened. But let's not dive into that just yet. First, we've got to talk about how Raspi's influence grew to the point where people thought he was controlling the entire Russian government. Because it's not enough to be a creepy mystic, he had to be a creepy mystic with power. Alright, so we've covered so far Rasputin's now in St. Petersburg. He's hypnotized his way into the royal palace like a bearded Darren Brown. But for the story to actually make any kind of sense, we need to understand the absolute circus that was happening in Russia at the time. Seriously, the political climate was so messy. So it all starts with the Romanovs. The Romanovs are the longest reigning royal dynasty in Russian history. These guys ruled Russia for over 300 years, starting in 1613. For my UK listeners, they were basically the Russian equivalent of the Windsors, except with fewer corgis and a lot more death and revolution, basically. The Romanovs were the second dynasty to ever rule Russia, and they did it with an iron fist, literally. They were autocrats, which is a fancy way of saying what I say goes. No debates, no votes, no asking the peasants if they were cool with starving to death. Just royal decrees and a lot of finger pointing. And because they believed they were chosen by God, they genuinely thought they were handpicked by the Almighty to rule Russia. That must be nice, right? Like, oh, I'm rich and powerful, not because my ancestors were ruthless conquerors, but because God loves me more than you. Basically what they were saying. So imagine that, them inviting someone over a family dinner. Oh, you're a farmer. That's nice. Well, I'm God's chosen ruler of all of Russia, so pass the caviar, peasant. And they made sure everyone knew just how special they were by building palaces that looked like they were designed by Liberace on hallucinogenics. They had gold everywhere, chandeliers, so many jewels. It was unbelievable. Meanwhile, your average Russian peasant was living in a shack, surviving on a diet of potatoes, and if they were feeling a bit fancy, more potatoes. And shout out to one of my mates because I know how much he would love that, just to live on potatoes. If you're listening, let me know. But seriously, the absolute distance between wealth and peasant at this time was so far apart, right? And you had all of these peasants looking up at these gold palaces, thinking, you know what? Let's just start a fucking revolution. And that's exactly what was happening. So by the time Rasputin showed up, Russia was a pressure cooker of discontent. The Romanovs were living in this luxury, while the vast majority of Russians were living in poverty with barely enough to eat. People were starving, dying of disease, and just generally having a very shit time. The Romanovs ruled over 125 million people, an empire that covered 1/6 of the Earth's landmass. That's huge. And it was multi ethnic, multi religious, and multi problematic. Basically, Nicholas II was trying to rule a country the size of a continent with the political skills of about a ham sandwich, I'd say. And to be fair, his dad didn't help. Tsar Alexander III ruled before Nicholas, and he was, well, a massive dick, to be fair. He was super into Russian Orthodox religion, hardcore nationalism, and just a dash of anti Semitism. By dash, I mean bucket loads. He was not a fan of diversity at all. And when you look at the scope of Russia and you look at the demographic of Russia and where it sits on the map, it's so bizarre to think that you don't want diversity. It spans from all the way from Eastern Europe all the way into Asia, above India, above China, above like Mongolia. Like, you're gonna have so many different races of people who live in that landmass. So to be against diversity is kind of like you're kind of just against your own country, you idiot. And yeah, he was the type of guy that thought the solution to political dissent was public hangings. And now, I mean, bring it back. No, no. He did a lot of public hangings, right? People hated him, but he didn't care because he genuinely thought that God put him on the throne. And if God thinks you're great, who cares what peasants think, right? So that was his whole vibe. He was like, I don't need public approval. I have divine approval, which is a bold strategy for a leader of a country so big. Maybe you do have to rule with an iron fist because there is 120 million people over 1/6 of the Earth's landmass. Like, maybe you do. I mean, it's not. It obviously worked because Russia's still standing today, but maybe it's not the best approach when your citizens are starving and your buildings are made out of gold leaf. And to make things worse, during his reign, there was a massive famine and a cholera outbreak that killed about 500,000 people. Oh, just a casual catastrophe. No big deal. But instead of helping, Alexandra III just cracked down harder on dissent and shockingly did not win him any popularity contests. But just when people were ready to revolt, Alexander III died of a kidney disease in 1894, and Russia collectively went, well, can't get worse than him, right? Oh, how wrong they were. Enter Nicholas II, Alexander's eldest son and quite possibly the most underqualified monarch in Russian history. He was 26 when he became Tsar, and to say he wasn't ready would be an understatement. When he found out he was going to be Tsar, he literally asked his cousin, what is going to happen to me and all of Russia? Mate, you're the ruler of 125 million people. Maybe just don't say that out loud. Nicholas was a reluctant ruler. He didn't want the job, and he was absolutely terrible at it. His father never bothered to train him because Alexander III thought he'd live forever because he was God's chosen one. Yep. So Nicholas was about as prepared as to run Russia as I am to fly a plane. And you know what? I think I could fly a plane. I think if it came to it and everyone else on the plane was passed out or whatever, and it was just left to me, I think I could fly that plane and land it. I swear down. And actually, there was a study done recently, and they asked that question too. If it came to it, do you think you could fly and land a plane? And it was something like, of all the people they asked, 97% of men said yes, and only 5% of women said yes. I just found that as just a funny thing. Like, men, we just have this in our mind where we go like, yeah, I could do that. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just plane, isn't it? I flew a plane on kite. Like, yeah, it should be alright. Yeah. But yeah, no, look, I actually think I could. Like that. This is the problem, though. Like in our minds, I think we actually think we can, and I don't think it's that hard. Again, it's just like you're kind of just convincing yourself that you could do it. But um, what do you think? If the plane was in an emergency, the pilot dies, whatever, would you be able to fly a plane? Like, let me know in the comments. Actually, I'll make it the poll. I'll make it the poll in the comments. If you're listening on Spotify, I'll make it the poll in the comments. Do you think you could fly a plane if you had to? Yes or no? And let me know in the comments as well, yeah. But anyway, back to Nicholas. All Nicholas wanted to do was hang out with his super hot wife, Alexandra, and play Happy Families in the gigantic palace. And who can blame him? I mean, he didn't want the power. He was just kind of born into it, inherited it, but he did accidentally spark a revolution that wiped out his entire family. Yep. But before that, Nicholas was living in a weird state of denial. Kept saying things like, I am chosen by God to rule. Terrible, terrible Russian accent. My apologies. But I just feel like that is him regurgitating what he heard his dad say. And he thought that maybe that's how his dad kept the country in check. So he just started saying it like, I am chosen by God to rule. I don't know why I'm so Spanish. Okay, no, one more time, one more time. Russia, Russia, привет, привет. Okay. I am chosen by God to rule. I will break you. I am chosen by God to rule. Anyway, I'll get it. By the end of the episode, I'm going to get it. In my head, I'm practicing over. I am chosen by God to rule. Oh no, I so Spanish. Anyway, so Nicholas did have a problem though that he couldn't ignore, and that's his son Tsarevich Alexei. So he was Nicholas and Alexandra's youngest child and their only son. He was heir to the throne and also was very, very sick. So he was a hemophiliac, so which meant that even the smallest bump or cut could be deadly to him. So for context, hemophilia is a genetic disorder that stops your blood from clotting. So if Alexei scraped his knee, he wouldn't just get a scab, he'd bleed and bleed and just keep bleeding. And back then, the only medical advice was basically don't fall over, lad. Like, just don't fall over, don't hurt yourself, don't break anything. And it also didn't help that his mother, Tsarina Alexandra, was just an anxious mess. You can only imagine if your son is only a sneeze away from bleeding to death. Um, you would be. I mean, come on. But she was convinced that if she lost him, she'd lose everything. And that's when good old Raspy shuffles onto the scene, looking like a half drowned alley cat, but promising miracles. So imagine that. Your son's dying, doctors are useless, and this creepy mystic with terrifying eyes shows up and says, Don't worry, I got this. Oh, that was better. Yeah. But honestly, you kind of call security, wouldn't you? But Alex, but Alexandra was so desperate that she let Raspy have a go. So in 1907, Alexei hurt his leg, and no one could stop the bleeding. The doctors were useless, still prescribing him cocaine and leeches. But Rasputin shows up and does some mumbo jumbo prayers, and the next morning, Alexei is fine. No fever, no pain, no bleeding, just perfectly healthy young boy. I mean, it was a miracle. It's an absolute miracle. Or at least that's what the family thought, right? In reality, in terms of like if we look at this from like a medical standpoint, Raspy probably just told the doctors to stop giving Alexei aspirin, which was the brand new kind of wonder drug at the time. Everyone was taking it. But unfortunately, it's a blood thinner, which is the last thing you want to give to a kid with hemophilia because of the blood and the bleeding. So, but at the time, like no one knew that. So all they knew was that Rasputin saved their son's life. From that point on, Alexandra was hooked. Rasputin became her miracle worker, her confidant, and her absolute favorite person in the world, which understandably made everyone else in the palace furious. It was almost like Raspi had hacked the royal family's Wi-Fi password, if you know what I mean. This was the thing. People don't give Rasputin enough credit because of, how much of a weirdo he is, but he was a smart guy. He knew what he was doing and he knew how to manipulate people. He didn't just heal Alexei. He used his new position to whisper, influence her decisions, and by extension, Russian politics. And Alexandra believed that Rasputin was sent here by God. So then it's like another problem on top of that. You've got the ruler of the country who's like, I'm chosen by God. And then you got this magical healer who's been sent by God. It makes them kind of untouchable in a sense because she starts to trust his advice over the rulers or her husband or whatever it might be. She's now just taken all influence from him whilst he was smelling like a medieval foot. Like, it when you think about it, it doesn't make sense, but in the moment when they had nothing else, it was early 1900s, they got nothing else to do, so they were just like really on board. And it wasn't just Alexandra who was under his spell. People said that Raspi could, charm the pants off anyone with his whole the more we sin, the closer we get to God kind of thing. So fancy a shag, So, but not everyone was falling for the charm, obviously. People in the royal court were fuming. They saw him as a creepy puppet master controlling Alexandra and by extension, Nicholas. They thought he was a mad monk who was ruining Russia from behind the scenes. And the Russian public weren't too pleased either because while Raspi was hypnotizing the royal family, the rest of Russia, as I mentioned, was absolutely falling apart. People were starving. World War One was draining the economy, and Nicholas was busy pretending to be a military leader while his wife took political advice from Rasputin. And it also didn't help that Alexandra was already very unpopular. She was German, and Russia was at war at the time with Germany, so people were suspicious of her loyalties. And now she was hanging around with this mystical peasant from Serbia. Yeah, people were talking, and the rumors were wild. They said Rasputin was having an affair with Alexandra, that he was actually controlling the government. Some even said he was a German spy sent to Russia from the inside. To be fair, he did look like he was up to something, but the truth is, he was just a narcissist who got way too close to power, and the more influence he gained, the more people hated him. Classic. Ministers were losing their jobs because Raspi said so, nobles were being humiliated because he didn't like them, and yet Alexandra protected him at every turn. But the public had had enough. They were angry, and they were convinced that Rasputin was the reason for all of their suffering. And let's be real, I mean, when your country's falling apart, and your leaders are taking advice from a man who looks like he lives under a bridge, you'd be pretty angry too. Almost as angry as we are at the government right now, because, what a load of wetties. Oh, can't stand them. Anyway, but the Russian people, they wanted him gone. The nobles wanted him dead. And Raspi, well, he was too busy sleeping with half of St. Petersburg to notice the knives being sharpened behind his back. And the newspapers at the time, by the way, were having a field day. They published scandalous cartoons of Raspi controlling Alexandra like a puppet. They printed rumors about his affairs, his mystical powers, and his supposedly enormous dog. He got that dog, apparently. Yeah, apparently so much so that later, once he eventually is killed, there were rumors that his special weapon was cut off and preserved in a jar. To this day, some people claim it's still on display in a museum in Paris because apparently we need to keep a historical record of that kind of thing. I mean, if you got that thing, if you got the thing, if you got that thing, that's some clout though, isn't it? It's been put in a jar and it's on display for all time in museum. Like, yeah. But obviously, while everyone was laughing at the scandalous cartoons and gossiping about Raspi's private thing, the Russian nobles had had enough. They were losing power, losing influence, and losing their patience. So they came up with a cunning plan to solve Russia's Rasputin problem once and for all. It was dramatic, it was bloody, and it was way more complicated than it needed to be because Raspi didn't die easily. Like, seriously, this man was harder to kill than a cockroach. Swear down. But the nobles were determined. They were going to take him out, no matter how many times he came back from the dead. And let me tell you, the assassination attempts on Rasputin are pretty legendary. Poisoned, shot, beaten, drowned, and he just kept coming back. Honestly, it's like the fucking Mike Myers from Halloween. No matter what they do to this kid in the next film, you better believe he's back and he's alive. Like, is he supernatural? Like, what is this fucking thing? But what is Mike Myers, by the way? Can we just take a little segment here? What is Mike Myers? Is he just a normal man who's just got a very high pain tolerance, or is he supernatural? Because every fucking film he comes back and he's just the same slow deadpan walk with a knife, and even like Jamie Lee Curtis came back for one like couple of years ago, and now she's like really old compared to the first film, and Mike Myers is just still walking around like. Oh, what's the tune? Oh, what is it? No, that's Mission Impossible. Wait, let me get it. Let me get it up. What is the Halloween theme song? I need to find this out right now. One second. One second. One second. Because it's something like that, isn't it? Okay, let's have a look what it actually is. I wasn't that far off. Anyway, so the Russian fucking nobles, whatever, they set their trap, right? And honestly, here's how wild it was and how hard it was to kill this fucking mad monk. So, spoiler alert. So, it involves poisoned cakes, bullets, and a river that may or may not have frozen him solid. So, let's dive in to the most infamous assassination attempt in history. So, we've got Prince Felix Yusupov. He's rich, powerful, and married to Tsar's niece, which means he's basically Russian royalty. He's also had enough of Raspi's nonsense, so he can't stand seeing his country fall apart while this creepy mystic whispers in the Tsarina's ear. So he gets a few mates together and decides to take matters into his own hands. Because nothing says mature political strategy like plotting a murder in your mansion's basement. And that's exactly what Yusupov did. He invited Raspi over to his palace, telling him he wanted to meet his beautiful wife Irina. Now, Irina wasn't even in St. Petersburg at the time, but Raspi obviously didn't know that. All he heard was a beautiful woman and private meeting, and was there faster than you could say, holy scandal. Honestly, Raspi, so predictable. You walked into your own death. You should have saw it coming, bruh. Honestly, if you want to trap this kid or you want to get him to do something, all you have to do is promise booze, a party, and some female company. I mean, he's basically all of us men. I mean, come on. So Rasputin shows up at Yusupov's palace, and the scene is set. They lead him down into the basement, which they've decked out to like a fancy sitting room. There's cakes, there's wine, and there's enough cyanide to take down a small army. Because you see, the plan was simple: poison the cake, let Raspy eat them, and watch him drop dead. Easy. Easy peasy, done, in and out. Well, nothing about Raspy is ever bloody easy, so he starts wolfing down the cyanidized cakes one after the other, and nothing. He's chatting away, laughing, perfectly fine. In fact, he even asks for some wine to wash him down, so Yusupov gives him the cyanide-laced wine. And guess what? He drinks it, still nothing. This man's eating cyanide like it's a snack. Meanwhile, you got Yusupov watching him, probably thinking, what the fuck is this guy made of? Like, who is this guy? Where is he from? Why can this guy eat cyanide and not die? This man is the beast. He's a beast. It's gonna get there. I promise you by the end of the episode. So so at this point they start panicking. Obs, the cyanide isn't working and Raspi's still going strong. Probably like ready to get it on with this beautiful woman that was mentioned. He's had some cake and wine. He's ready. So Yusupov does what any rational man would do. He pulls out a gun and shoots Raspi in the chest. Yeah, point blank. Raspy goes down finally. They check his pulse. He's dead. Job done. Cake with cyanide, wine with cyanide, bullet in the chest, dead. Yusupov goes upstairs to celebrate with his friends, but after a while, he starts to get paranoid. What if Raspi is not really dead? So he heads back downstairs to check and finds Rasputin's body lying on the floor. Except this time, not so still. Yep, Raspi's eyes snap open, he sits up, he lunges at Yusupov, screaming that he's going to tell the Tsarina everything. But Yusupov manages to break free, run back upstairs, screaming like a terrified toddler. Meanwhile, Raspi gets up, staggers out of the basement, and starts crawling across the courtyard, trying to escape. Yeah, and remember, this man's been poisoned and shot in the chest, and he's still crawling out there like a fucking zombie. So Yusupov's mates come running out, guns blazing, they shoot him again, and again, and again. In total, they shot him 4 times before he finally stops moving. Just to be sure, they also beat him up, just for good measure. Just get that last little fucking kick in there. Then wrap him up in a carpet and throw him in the icy Neva River. Yep. And the legend has it that when his body was found, his lungs were full of water, which means he was still alive when they chucked him in the river. This man would just not die. But this time, it actually worked. Raspi was dead, and Russia collectively breathed a sigh of relief. Or at least they did until the rumors started flying. But of course, it couldn't just end there. People said his corpse sat up during the autopsy, others claimed his ghost haunted the palace, and the wildest rumor, that he cursed the Romanov family with his dying breath, promising that they'd all be dead within 2 years. And you know what? They were. Less than 2 years later, the entire Romanov family was executed by the Bolsheviks, which only added to the legend of Rasputin. People started saying he was a demon or an immortal wizard who cursed Russia from beyond the grave. Honestly, this man is the gift that just keeps on giving. Like, even after his death, he's just causing absolute chaos. uh, Actually, you know how people ask you, like, if you want someone to sit at your table for a dinner, like, who would you choose in terms of like celebrities, figures, past, present, future? Raspi's becoming one of mine. I want to hear his fucking story. I want to have a chat with him. I want to see like how like enigmatic he really is, or is he actually a wizard? Like, does he do random shit? But let me tell you, I wouldn't invite any women around, especially with that dog. But dead or not, Raspi's influence obviously didn't die with him. His reputation, his scandals, and his connection to the Romanovs helped fuel the revolution that will bring down the Russian monarchy. And in a weird way, he did exactly what his enemies feared. He destroyed the Romanovs, even if it was just by accident. And say what you want about Raspi, he was creepy, manipulative, and probably smelled like old cabbage, but he was the only one who could cure, in quotation marks, Alexei's homophilia. And the nobles underestimated Rasputin's influence because they thought killing him would make the Romanovs look strong again. But all it did was just made them look weak and vulnerable. So if a group of disgruntled aristocrats could murder the Tsarina's closest advisor, who was safe? And certainly not the Romanovs, because without Rasputin, there was no one left to defend them, no one to calm Alexandra's paranoia, and no one to stop the public from turning against them completely. The Russian Revolution was right around the corner, and it was about to hit them like a freight train. In February 1917, just 2 months after Raspi's death, protests broke out across Russia. People were starving, soldiers were deserting, and Nicholas was so disconnected from reality, he might as well have been on another planet. And when the people demanded change, Nicholas responded by doing absolutely nothing. Yeah, real man of action, that one. But he refused to leave the front lines, refused to listen to his advisors, and just kept insisting that God would sort it out. Well, in March 1917, Nicholas was forced to abdicate, ending over 300 years of Romanov rule. And just like that, the Russian monarchy was over. Nicholas and his family were put under house arrest, and suddenly the most powerful family in Russia were prisoners in their own palace. I mean, there's worse ways to be a prisoner. I mean, you're still in a palace. But in July 1918, the Bolsheviks executed the entire Romanov family, Nicholas, Alexandra, and all 5 of their children. It was brutal, bloody, and it shocked the world. And people started to wonder, was it a political assassination or was it this cure of Rasputin? And honestly, if Rasputin did curse them, he did a thorough job. But whether or not the curse was real, his influence definitely was, because without him, Alexandra never would have been so isolated, Nicholas would have never been so clueless, and the Romanovs might have survived the revolution. Instead, they went down in history as the last Russian royals, and Rasputin became a legend, the mad monk who brought down an empire. People still talk about him today, not as a man, but as a mythical figure. So was he a holy healer, a manipulative conman, or an actual wizard? Probably a mix of all three. Let's just go with that. And even now, over a century later, people are still fascinated by him, which is why we're not quite done with this story. Because Rasputin's death wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of the end for the Romanovs. So next time we're diving into part 2, where we'll cover the tragic downfall of the last Tsar, Russia, the bloody end of the Romanov dynasty, and all the conspiracy theories that followed. Because if you thought Raspi's story was dramatic, just wait until you hear about the Romanovs. Political assassinations, secret burials, and a missing princess who might have survived. It's like the most intense episode of EastEnders you've ever heard of. So join us next week for the gripping conclusion of Russia's most tragic tale. You are not going to want to miss the conclusion to this story next Wednesday. Alright, so what do you think? Could there be more to the downfall of the Romanovs and Raspi's mystique than just a series of historical mishaps? Are there truly hidden connections between the notorious mystic and the tragic fate of Russia's last royal family? Connections that go far beyond what we've seen? And if so, just how deep does the rabbit hole go? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. Drop me a line, share your theories, and let's keep the conversation going. After all, if history's conspiracy is the spice of life, then we're here to stir the pot. You can get in touch on our socials at Conspiracy. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok. You can also email me, conspiracy@gmail.com. I'm always keen to hear what you guys have to say. And again, as I mentioned at the start of the episode, please could you hit that subscribe button for me and leave me a quick positive review. It really, really helps with getting seen in the podcast world. I would really appreciate it, guys, and I want to keep creating this podcast with you and build this conspiracy community. Conspiracy. That's it for today's episode of Conspiracy, where weird is the new normal. Join us next Wednesday for the conclusion of this story. And if you liked today's episode, don't forget to hit subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your conspiracy-loving mates. And remember, the truth is out there.